One of the most unsettling characteristics that separates man from beast is that many of us choose to take our own lives. What's even more haunting is that the reasons for doing so are not always obvious. It's easy to point to trauma, loss, addiction, or failure, but these are often catalysts, not causes. Multiple qualitative studies, including interviews with suicide survivors and analyses on suicide notes, have found a recurring theme: a profound sense of psychological isolation. Not just being alone in a room, but being exiled from meaning, from the feeling of being known. This isolation often doesn't come from the outside, it's internal. It's the slow erosion of one's relation to self. It's a disintegration. And no philosopher articulated this more deeply than Soren Kierkegaard. Kierkegaard believed despair was not just sadness, it was a sickness unto death, a spiritual illness rooted in how we relate to ourselves, or fail to. And in his book by that name, he identifies multiple forms of despair. The most dangerous, he says, the most likely to end in suicide, is something he calls being reserved. This is not the common meaning of reserved, quiet, or introverted. For Kierkegaard, being reserved is when the self turns inward and begins to cut off all outward relation to other people, to truth, and most of all, to the power that created it. The self becomes its own god, but not in strength, in secret defeat. It starts earlier than this though. First, a person despairs over the earthly, over some loss, shame, or failure. But then, more deeply, they begin to despair over their own self, over what they are. Kierkegaard calls this despair over weakness. But paradoxically, this despair is not humility. It is a form of inverted pride. The despairer cannot bear to accept who they truly are. They cannot stand to be dependent. They shrink away from their need to be grounded in something greater than themselves. Rather than cry out or open up, they retreat. And this is when they become reserved. They begin to close all the doors. They cut themselves off from others, but also from themselves. They bury their deepest needs beneath cynicism, apathy, or detachment. They no longer expect healing because they no longer believe anything outside of them can touch them. This is not despair as emotional intensity. It's a slow freezing of the soul, a refusal to relate, a fortress built out of shame and silent pride. And this is where suicide enters the picture. Kierkegaard makes it clear: if the self does not surrender itself to the source of its being, what he calls God, then it will collapse in on itself. And if that collapse remains unbroken, it leads to death. Use the tension. Surrendering doesn't mean giving up into chaos. It doesn't mean abandoning reasoning. It means releasing the illusion that the self can create itself, sustain itself, and save itself. An atheist might hear this and assume Kierkegaard is simply saying surrender to the uncontrollable, but that's not what he means. The uncontrollable is impersonal, an illusion. But God, in Kierkegaard's view, is the one relation that restores the self rather than annihilates it. It is a claim upon the self, not a void. And without that claim, nothing has any real right to keep you here, and the world becomes thin and eventually unbearable. To illuminate this, we can turn to Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. Dostoevsky gives us a character named Svidrigailov, a man of means and appetite, but no real belief. He chases pleasure, he manipulates others, and when all his schemes collapse and the mask falls away, there is nothing left behind his eyes. No purpose, no relation, just silence. He says shortly before ending his life, what can be done if there is no happiness anywhere? For him, the only absolute is nothing. This is the final consequence of reserve. When nothing holds you, nothing stops you. But Kierkegaard doesn't end here. He insists that there's hope, that to become aware of one's despair is already a form of grace. It is not too late when you see the sickness. It's too late when you call the sickness health. To those who feel the weight of self-annihilation, Kierkegaard offers this: do not try to save yourself by yourself. You were never made to. The self is not the source of the self. And if there is a God who made you, then even your despair can be taken up into something greater, transformed, not erased. The greatest tragedy is not that people suffer, it's that they suffer alone. Thank you for watching that video. It is a very heavy topic and one that is quite close to me. I don't think I'll make any more videos about that, but I'm glad that I did. Thank you for watching.